Hi, this is a video looking at EDUQAS feedback from the examining report and a recent training day from someone from EDUQAS with feedback, tips and advice for paper 2 reading non-fiction. So remember, this exam is 30% of your whole grade. It's an hour and 15 if you have 25% extra time. 2 extracts to read, 6 questions, you need around half marks to pass. Remember, for paper 2 reading, you get 2 extracts on a similar theme. This time it's a modern extract and an older extract. About surfing, so there's extract 1, which is the modern one's normally a bit longer with a couple of pictures. And then the one from the 19th century is normally a page or less than a page. There they are together. Okay, remember, question 1 and 2 is on extract 1, 3 and 4 on the second extract, 5 and 6 on both. Okay, so we're going to look at the examining report and, like I said, a recent training day on EDUQAS, specifically on paper 2 reading. So this examiner's report gives feedback on the recent exams. So I'm looking at the one from last summer and last November. It's written by the examiners. So it's written by the people who mark your papers and who actually create the exam papers. And it highlights basically where people can improve and the most common mistakes or pitfalls that students make in the exam. So we're going to go through each question one by one and very quickly just give you a bit of advice and also the main mistakes students make. So question 1, to refresh your memory, I'll show a question of each. Question 1 and 3 are the same. 3 search and find questions. So you go through the extract, find your answers. Okay, so for this question, they said candidates needed to read the whole article before looking at the question. So what students tend to do is, if they don't read the article first, they just try to pick out the answer, and that might result in you picking the wrong thing. It does say on the front of the exam board you do have 10 minutes to read, so you have 5 minutes to read the extract. Really drink in the extract. Okay, so candidates need to read the complete article, and it says in the examining report, for 1C, candidates had to read the whole of the article as the answer only appeared in the final sentence of the final paragraph. So they will shove stuff right at the end. So like I say, read the whole article, and it also will set you up for the second harder question if you've read the whole article. Okay, for this opening question with candidates poorly, it was almost because they misread the question. So finding the information wasn't a problem, but they just misread the question. So good exam technique would be to read each question twice. Okay, question 2 is a writer's craft question. So, for example, the one in the surf one was, how does the writer of the newspaper show the power of the ocean? Okay. And from now on in the text, in the exam, you're using quotes to back it up. Okay, so question 2, this is called the craft of the writer, or the writer's craft question. And they said the best responses showed good coverage across the whole text. That means, across the whole extract, if you're doing 6 quotes, 2 from the start, 2 from the middle, 2 from the end. If you're doing more, all across, with insightful comments on questions. So you can do a mixture of PEs and maybe just simple ones. So a simple one might be, if the question was, how does the writer show the power of the ocean, and they said there are 100-foot waves regularly, you could literally just put, the writer shows the power of the ocean as we are told in quotes there are 100-foot waves regularly. If it was one more, maybe you had to explain it. Maybe if the quote was something like, oh, the wave shattered my surfboard, maybe you could say the writer shows the power of the ocean when it says shattered my surfboard. This shows the power of the ocean as it's turned its board into little pieces, something like that. So if it's an easy quote, just embed it into a sentence. If you need to explain, then do. And the weaker responses to this question only maybe take quotes from 1 or 2 paragraphs, or sometimes students just write out quotes with no commentary at all. Okay. Question 4 is very similar to question 2. It's writer's craft again, but it's on the other extract, which is always slightly harder to read, as it's from 200 years ago, and it's an evaluation question. So, for example, Mike Doyle's account captures his respect for the surfers he meets in California. How far do you agree? So again, at a recent training event for EDUQAS, the person did say you can do the thing where you somewhat agree, but she basically said you should never really be flatly disagreeing with the question. The person said there's always enough quotes in there to fully agree with the question. So the evaluation question, again, it's exactly the same as question 2 really. Coverage across the whole text, comment on your quotations, small explanations if needed, and weaker responses only focus on 1 or 2 paragraphs. So again, same as the other one. A little bit of a difference. Question 3 then, this is now looking at 2 texts. Using information from both texts, explain briefly the weather conditions faced by Andrew Cotton and Mike Doyle, the 2 surfers. Okay, so the weather conditions. So question 5, it's worth 4 marks. A 4-mark question asks candidates to select relevant material from across the 2 texts. Weaker students drift from the focus of the question, so that's the main mistake. So in this case, the weather conditions is the focus of the question. If you go away from that at all, if you don't talk specifically about the weather, you won't get a mark, and students will gain full marks by selecting 2 details from each text. A lot of students waste time on this question by comparing and explaining their quotes. You don't need to do either. It's a 4-mark question. It's a search and find question. It's exactly the same as question 1 and 3, but for both texts. Okay, the final question. Both of these texts are about surfers in extreme situations. Compare the difficulties the surfers endured in the ocean, how the surfers get their feelings about the difficulties across the degrees. I would say you can get 8 out of 10 by just doing the first bullet point, and that's what I tell my students to do. So question 6, the person in the examining EDUQAS training day, she said it's not really a comparison question, it is finding the quotes and put them into your answer. No explanations needed, with a little asterisk, so I'll go back to explain that in a minute. So again, keep focused on the theme of the question. In this case, it's the difficulties the surfers had in the water. You can reuse quotations from earlier questions. So if there's quotes from question 2 that fit this question, you can use it. And it says in the examining report, there were too many candidates whose time management was such that they had allowed themselves too little time to tackle the question in sufficient detail. Basically, they didn't do the question because they ran out of time. What students tend to do is they do questions 1 to 5. They realise they've spent too long on them. Then they ended up skipping question 6 because remember, you've still got 2 writing questions to do in the second hour of the exam. I always actually tell my students to do the exam in the order of 1, 3, 5, 6, 2, 4, which means 1, 3, 5, 6 are basically search and find questions that are nice and easy, and then you've got the slightly harder questions 2 and question 4. You can almost pass the exam just by doing questions 1, 3, 5 and 6. So that's what I tell my students to do. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful and just giving you a few tips from the horse's mouth. So these tips and comments I've given you are really directly from the people who mark your papers and who create your papers, so we can really trust their information.